What's up, everybody? What's up, MGTOW? So this is going to be a response video to Redshift's response video to one of my Miscegenation videos. Now, if you don't know who Redshift is, I'll put a link to his channel, although I have recommended his channel before previously on my channel. But if you want to check out his channel, he's definitely one of the better anarcho MGTOW out there, and he's got some good videos on a lot of different topics, political and MGTOWs type of stuff. And while Redshift may be farther to the right than anybody, I don't think that he's quite as far to the bottom as I am. So there's a definite difference between the channels there. Now, I'm not exactly sure which video he watched on Miscegenation because I've made quite a few videos on Miscegenation, but I think that people often kind of miss the point of my videos. I think it's kind of because I talk too contextually sometimes. Like, like when you're talking casually and, you're talking about a certain thing or whatever, and you start out the conversation, you're like referencing the car this and the car that, and then that point in the conversation where you just start saying it instead of the car, like that's kind of where I'm always talking from. I'm like, it's definitely a communication problem of mine where I just assume that people kind of get what I'm talking about and then try to further the conversation. But in any case, I think that the point of my miscegenation videos is not so much to be pro miscegenation, because the concept of having some type of like only one race in the entire world and everybody mixed together, like that just sounds completely stupid to me. But it's more of just like an apologist position on interracial dating as opposed to miscegenation, because I'm definitely not like a swirler type of person. I don't promote any type of I don't really promote any type of sex at all. Do what you want with your dick. I don't care. But I think the main point that kind of underlies all my miscegenation videos is this kind of like apologist position where, people like Redshift take a very hard line stance against miscegenation. And I think it's kind of a complex topic because on a social level, it could be immoral in a certain sense, like to purposefully promote the replacement of a specific race, any race. That's basically genocide in that sense. But on a personal level, I don't really see an immorality to it if it's an actual like natural occurrence, and nobody was like manipulated or psychologically manipulated to do it. And I also just don't see it as that big of a problem with the current rate of miscegenation that goes on in the United States. I'm not saying that it's not something that shouldn't be looked at, but I think that some people in the alt-right make it out to be a bigger problem than it actually is, which, like stuff that's going on with the government and all types of other shit like censorship and stuff like that seems to be more pertinent of a problem than the 10% or whatever of people that are interracial couples and stuff like that. And also, one of the things that I hear a lot is that, miscegenation is analogized with homosexuality. And personally, I don't see how that's the same thing, because, and I think that was one of the points that I was trying to get across, is that, from a reproductive standpoint, miscegenation is completely natural, and one could even say an alpha thing to do. Where, in the past, the only people that were miscegenating were men that were warriors and conquerors and things like that. And in fact, possibly even the first MGTOW kind of thing was that. Because if you really look historically at what governments used to do with the problem of MGTOW, was that they would send them to conquer other countries. I mean, you got a bunch of young guys and you're about to hit the incel rebellion, and so you just give them a bunch of weapons and send them to another country that you don't like. And that's how they used to handle MGTOW in the past. But since you can't do that anymore, now you can see how it's becoming like a social problem. Now, as far as it goes with some of the alt-right's more basic premises, I mean, to me at least, there's a difference between evolutionary or genetically evolutionary homelands and places that have been colonized. Because places that have been colonized were colonized through force. So basically, when, somebody from the alt-right or white people in general claim that the United States is a quote-unquote white country, then that, to me personally as a black person, that's basically a threat. Is that you're saying that even though you were born here, you don't belong here. Even though we don't actually belong here genetically either, because we didn't evolve here genetically, but we conquered the place. So that makes it into basically like a war zone. Because if you're saying that your claim to the United States is threat of violence or threat of force, because that's basically the premise of it, is that we killed the people that were here before us, so therefore through the laws of warfare, we now own this place. But when you play the laws of warfare game, then if somebody else uses force or violence or whatever against you, you can't really complain about it. You can't say, it takes that argument out, where you can't say, oh, well, this isn't fair to white people now that black people are teaming up with Latino people and Asian people and voting Democrat against us and using government force to fuck us over. Because your main claim is that we took over this place through force. So, live by the sword, die by the sword. That's how it goes in that context. Because for me personally, I 100% support evolutionary homelands being completely delegated to those people that have that genetics. If European people wanted to kick all black people and Asian people out of Europe, I would have no problem with that. But then you'd have to have the same consideration for Native Americans. If Native Americans said, oh, we want everybody to leave, but nobody's going to do that. Nobody's going to do that. So that's my take on, evolutionary homelands versus colonization. And then as a side note, where he was talking about, what's going on in Africa and specifically South Africa, I mean, that shit is fucked up as well. But I think part of the problem of colonization, because a lot of people like to look at colonization as this kind of massive benefit to black people. Oh, you guys would have been like this or like that if white people never came there. But it was a completely different system. You can't compare apples to oranges because, for instance, black people have a higher reproductive birth rate or whatever, but the infant mortality was much higher before colonization. So it balanced out the society. There wasn't as many people, because it's just kind of ironic that, Western people came and decreased the infant mortality rate, and now Bill Gates wants to teach black people in Africa how to use condoms. It's why take all those extra steps to achieve the same thing that was already naturally happening? And the second big problem with colonization was after the United Nations decided that it was kind of messed up that they did that after World War II, colonize Africa. When all the French people and the British people and the Portuguese people left and they already created this new system, it's kind of like, let's say, there's a kid riding down the street on his bike and, maybe it might have taken him an hour to get wherever he needed to go. And he was riding real slow and you're like, damn, that kid's on a bike. Maybe it's raining out. And so you pull over, you're driving, and then you're like, hey, man, I'll give you a ride. And he's like, oh, cool. It's only going to take me 10 minutes to get there now. He jumps in the car. You start driving. You're on the highway. You're driving 50 miles an hour. And then you just jump out of the car And it's like, okay, kid, well, you're going to have to get there the rest of the way yourself. And I mean, what do you think's going to happen? You think the kid's just going to slide over into the driver's seat and just start steering perfectly on the highway like he's never driven a car before? Like, that's basically what happened when what white people did when they colonized Africa. They set up a Western system that black people weren't ready for at that time. And then they just jumped out of the driver's seat and were like, okay, guys, drive it yourself. It's like, it's not going to work. It's just not going to work. Okay, so this is kind of tangentially related to his points on the devaluation of males of the opposite sex through miscegenation. And while it is true in a certain aspect, I would also, look at it from another aspect as well. Now, before I say this, I would preface this with the study that Dr. Dutton, the Jolly Heretic, put out on his channel. It was kind of a while ago, so I can't remember exactly what video it was. But basically, he was talking about miscegenation, and he was talking about how there's basically two subsets of people that participate in miscegenation. Now, the first set is what most people typically think about. They think about, kind of like a Chad or a Tyrone with, a girl from another race. And he's saying that those relationships are selected because typically the type of women that are looking for the Chad and Tyrone, for whatever reason, the R selected type of instinct was triggered in them, typically from either having, no father around or some type of childhood trauma, sexual abuse, stuff like that, where the women go through puberty earlier, which I also think is caused by estrogen mimickers too, because as much as people talk about how soy is bad for men, soy is also bad for women too, because the estrogen mimickers force women to go into puberty earlier and also increases their chances for breast cancer. So soy is just bad for everybody, really. And it's just also interesting that the whole, single mother thing triggers girls to go into puberty earlier too, because of RK selection, whatever. So within those couples, obviously those are going to be, I guess, worse couples because they're R selected type of people. So they're looking for short-term relationships and they just happen to have kids because that's what happens when people like that have sex. And then he's saying that the second subset of people were people that were actually more similar to each other than they were to their group. Because that's one of the statistical things where you have to look at when you look at bell curves and stuff like that, that there's more difference within a group than there is between groups. Like, for example, a white guy with an IQ of 70 is probably less similar to a white guy with an IQ of 160 than a black guy with an IQ of 90 and a white guy with an IQ of 90. So within those groups where the people are more similar, they're typically, what he was saying was they're typically K-selected. So these are people that were looking for long-term parental investment, and they're focused on resource acquisition and stuff like that. But they just happen to be more similar to somebody of another race than they were to somebody in their own race. And those relationships are usually better off than the ones that are between the R-selected people. So saying that, it kind of brings into question two kind of topics within the whole interracial thing. One is just general sexual market value, where it's let's say for instance, you have, a white guy and he's getting turned down by white women left and right. He thinks he's forever alone or incel or something like that. and he's getting turned down left and right. He's got a good job. He's reasonably attractive. For whatever reason, he's getting turned down left and right. And then, a Latina chick is interested in him, and she fits all his qualifications, and she's actually offering a better deal than any of the white women that he's getting with at the time. I mean, would you really begrudge that guy? You'd be like, oh, the Jews got him. If somebody can get a better deal somewhere else, I just can't begrudge that in any way. And I mean, if you're saying, oh, well, you're a traitor to the race because you're getting a better deal, I mean, that's kind of fucked up. Then you need to tell somebody's sister to fuck him then. Basically, if he can't get any white girls and he's getting Latina girls throwing pussy at him, then you need to tell your sister to fuck this guy. Basically, otherwise how could you blame him? Like that. And then on top of that, it's a very Western idea, especially a Western male idea, to value freedom over security. So when you're saying that you want to create a system where miscegenation is basically illegal, then you're valuing security over freedom. Because if people don't have the freedom to choose who they're with, then it's moving towards sexual fascism, which, like I said, Redshift is further to the right than me, but I'm further down. So, as far as the miscegenation propaganda in the media, I mean, yes, it's there, and there's definitely a lot of different types of propaganda in the media that are bad for society in general, and that's just one of the flavors of it. Now, for me, personally, I'm against basically any form of subliminal messaging or advanced behavioral psychology being used on unsuspecting people. I mean, even to the point where, let's say, for instance, you could psychologically manipulate somebody to lose weight or quit smoking, but they didn't know. Like, you were doing it, like, subversively somehow. I would still be against that on ethical grounds, because it's like you're using psychological manipulation on somebody and you're not telling them. But it's like they're not going to do that in like commercials. They're not going to say, oh, this commercial was made by a team of psychologists to make you think a certain thing and feel a certain way, and it's actually, you're not supposed to be thinking this. They're not going to put that disclaimer on commercials and stuff like that. But I mean, yes, I definitely think that there is an overarching agenda to try to basically get people as atomized as possible and stuff like that. But at the same time, I do think that naturally most people are going to be with people of their same race, just pretty natural. And I think that if they could have changed our sexuality, they would have already done it. Like they are able to, change the violent tendencies of men a lot, and they're able to change a lot of the aspects of humanity. But to get rid of the sexual instinct and the survival instinct, I think that those two, they have to like just work around those. And like that's why they use so much sexual imagery in advertising, and that's why they use so much fear of death in advertising, because those two instincts are not really malleable. I mean, sure, there's like probably some wiggle room when you're a young kid to influence your sexuality and, influence the way you feel about death and stuff like that. But for the most part, those instincts are hardwired in like to the like deepest level of the psyche. And they have to like work around those most of the time. So yeah, that's really all I had to say on those topics. For the most part, I agree with what Redshift is saying on the general aspect of it. But like I said, it's hard to define when the interpersonal part of it becomes a social problem. And I guess that's up for interpretation. So with that, I'm going to get out of here. I'll leave a link to Redshift's channel. Have a good day and go MGTOW.